Hello, students. Welcome to Learning Management System. In this session, we are going to discuss about the origin of earthquakes, Chapter 7, Program BSc, Subject Language English, 4th semester, Session number 23, Origin of Earthquakes, Analysis, Question and Answers, created by Ravi Kumar A as ECD and Dr. Suresh SB as ACD. So I am Ravi Kumar, working as assistant professor in the Department of English, Government First Aid College, Yelahanka. Analysis. The story in context is finding the reason, origin of earthquakes. To the popular folk, interest starts with the interest of human beings, the two from the people who are living remotely or the primitive people who are away from the urban education system, where education itself enlightens them, makes them aware of their surroundings with scientific reasoning and hand-proof examples. To prove the social happenings of the vicinity, they do with elaborate scientific experiments and visual aids. But in the rural culture, far away from the civilization, the folk want to find out their own reasoning for incidents taking place around him. The folk want to find out his own reasoning for the incidents taking place around him. Tries to seek the reason and seeks to explain natural phenomena. They provide primitive explanations for the many whys. This is the why questions early humans asked. They are found throughout the world and popular in all over the world. There is a strong connection between the tales and the myths. However, the setting in tales is earthly and deities play no role in folk tales as they do in the myths. For example, why the sun and the moon live in the sky, why stories come from, where stories come from, and why mosquitoes buzz in people's ears. These are a few samples of the curious folks in the present story. The hero Yagda's valiance is demonstrated throughout the story. His life starts with a stereotype substantiate. The story opens with the regular narrative outbreak and develops as once upon a time there lived a young man named Yagda. After his parents' untimely death, he became an orphan. Later, his grandparents took care of him and grew up with them. There were vast stretches of wild woodland and grassland, and so people living in villages moved around in woodland and grassland on the banks of rivers in search of stumps of trees and other chunks of wood. The young man, Agda, after his parents' death, as he grew up, he took up the responsibility of maintaining the family by gathering chunks of wood and selling them. One day, Yagda went to the nearby stretch of grassland with the village people to gather firewood. As they reached the grassland, an elephant appeared in front of them. The entire group of the villagers started to run away fast. While running, Yagda stumbled and fell down. Thus, the elephant caught him. He knew the elephant is going to trample him. He closed his eyes and faked being dead. The elephant then pushed Yagda here and there with his legs. In the process, Yagda fell into a hole, finding it inconvenient to deal with the man in the hole. The elephant left the spot. On his returning back to his grandparents, the people of the village also began to look upward to him as a valiant young man. On one day, Yagda felt a desire to travel around the world. He duly took leave of his grandparents and started on his journey. He walked through forests and stretches of grassland and swam across streams and rivers. Meanwhile, three men accompanied Yagdar on his world tour. The first one was Mipang, a woodcutter. A second one was Ipang, an elephant catcher, and the third one was Karpong, a stone breaker. All the four men walked on. After crossing five riverside forests, they came across a big river. The river was so big that they could not see its other bank. All the four men walked on. After crossing five riverside forests, they came across a big river. The river was so big that they could not see its other bank. However, they made a plan to reach outer shore as they start swimming. Yagda and his men have been have seen a huge fish near the other bank of the river waiting to swallow them. After a long seesaw with the fish, Yagda scored a triumph, pulled the fish onto the bank of the river. Here we can see some supernatural situations that contribute to the story. First one is the huge fish and Yagdar's valiant fight. Now the young man want to give a treat to his companions, so he want fire to cook fish. Yagda climbs a tree top and finds some smoke nearby habitat. Yagda sent Mipang to fetch fire from the house which he saw from the top of the tall tree to cook the fish. But Mipang, who went to fetch, was not returned. So the hero sends the remaining two. Yagda, after finding his friends were not returned from the village, he went to the village himself. On reaching the village, instantly stopped at the same house where the old woman was sitting on the platform. The old woman asked him to fetch the fire himself. Yagda immediately realized the situation, turned back and caught hold of the evil spirit in the form of an old woman. He lifted her up and whirling her round and round overhead like a boobang, threw her up and away to a great distance with a tremendous force. The earth then shook so severely to became so ugly that the other evil spirits took fright and fled the land helter skelter. It is said that earthquakes have their origin in that extraordinary event. People also say that the spirits on earth have preferred to remain invisible to the human beings then after. So here we have the elephant attack in the forest which made Agda a valiant hero. The second incident where the four friends started to cross the huge river. At the same time, they find a fish is waiting to swallow the people. And the final one, the final Agda finally kills the spirit which was in the disguise of an old woman to kill the four friends. This event was the root cause of origin of the earthquakes on the earth. Question answers. Who took care of Yagda and why? Answer. Once upon a time, there lived a young man named Yagda. After his parents' untimely death, he became an orphan. Later, his grandparents took care of him and he grew up with them. Why did villagers move around the woods and grassland? Villagers move around the woods and grassland because they were vast stretches of wild woodland and grassland, and so people living in villages moved across in woodland and grassland on the banks of rivers in search of stumps and trees and other chunks of woods. What did Yagda do when the elephant was so close to him? One day Yagda went to a grassland with the villagers to gather firewood. As they reached the grassland, an elephant appeared in front of them. The entire group of villagers started to run away fast. While running, Yagda stumbled and fell down. Thus, the elephant caught him. He knew the elephant is going to trample him. He closed his eyes and faked being dead. The elephant then pushed Yagda here and there with his legs. In the process, Yagda fell into a hole, finding it inconvenient to deal with the man in the hole. The elephant left the spot. How did the villagers look up to Yagda after he returned? Answer. Having escaped from the clutches of the elephant, Yagda grew more courageous than before, and the people of the village began to look up to him as a valiant young man. How many men accompanied Yagda? Three men accompanied Yagda. Mention the names of men who accompanied Yagda. The three men accompanied Yagda on his world tour. The first one was Mipang, the woodcutter. The second one was Yipang, an elephant catcher. And the third one was Karpang, a stone breaker. What did Yagda and his men come across in the river? Yagda and his men come across have been a huge fish near the other bank of the river, waiting to swallow them. After a long seesaw with the fish, Yagda scored a trump, pulled the fish onto the bank of the river. They come across this huge fish which is waiting to swallow these guys, these men. Why did Yagda send Mipang to the village house? Yagda sent Mipang to fetch fire from the house which he saw from the top of the tall tree to cook the fish. Where was the old woman sitting? Mipang went to the village to fetch fire and found the drooping old woman who sat on platform annexed to the veranda in the front part of the house. Even after three more men visit the village house and found her in the same place. Who threw the old woman far away and why? Yagda, after finding his friends were not returned from the village, he went to the village himself. On reaching the village, incidentally stopped at the same house where the old woman was sitting on the platform. The old woman asked him to fetch the fire himself. Yagda immediately realized the situation, turned back and caught hold of the evil spirit in the form of an old woman. He lifted her up and whirling her round and round overhead like a boomerang, threw her up and away to a great distance with a tremendous force. How did Yagda take care of his old grandparents? The young man Yagda, after his parents' untimely death, he became an orphan. His grandparents took care of him and he grew up with them. Later, when he become becomes a young man, he took care of the young his grandparents by fetching grassland and wood pecks from the forest and selling them in the nearby town. Describe the incident that took place when Yagda went to grassland along with the villagers. Yagda went to the nearby stretch of grassland with the village people to gather firewood. As they reached the grassland, an elephant appeared in front of them. The elephant that headed the animal kingdom. The entire group of villagers started to run away fast. While running, Yagda stumbled and fell down. Thus, the elephant caught him. He threw the elephant uh, elephant he knew the elephant is going to trample him. He closed his eyes and faked being dead. The elephant then pushed Agda here and there with his legs. In the process, Yagda fell into a hole, finding it inconvenient to deal with the man in the hole. The elephant left the spot. On his returning back to his grandparents, the people of the village also began to look him as a valiant young man. How did Yagda retaliate to the old woman, and why? Yagda also finding his friends were not returned from the after finding the villagers the after finding his friends were not returned from the village, he went to the village himself. On reaching the village, incidentally stopped at the same house where the old woman was sitting on the platform. The old woman asked him to fetch the fire himself. Yagdor immediately realized the situation, turned back and caught hold of her caught hold of the evil spirit in the form of an old woman. He lifted her up and whirling her round and round overhead like a boomerang, threw her up and away to a great distance with a tremendous force. Describe the Yagda's trip against the fish. While crossing the river, Yagda and his companions saw a huge fish near the other bank of the river, waiting to swallow them. When the fish was not far away from the Phosphemus, he caught hold of his companions and threw them onto the land of the bank, one after the other. Then he caught the fish by its tail and made an effort to keep it up to land. But it was the fish which pulled him into the water. Then, his next attempt, Yogda succeeded in pulling the fish up to land, but the fish managed to jerk himself back into water, taking Yagda with it. This seesaw went on for some time, but finally Yagda scored a trump against a fish which thrown on the ground on the bank of the river. Thank you. Here the session ends, and here we have some reference where you can get more information about folklore, folk tales, as well as the types of folk tales, and about the origin of earthquakes. Thank you. That's all from me.